morning, hello, wherever you are around the world. I hope you're doing very well. And if you're watching on the replay, hi there too. My name is Luke. I am a producer at How To Academy, and welcome to what I'm sure is going to be a brilliant event held in collaboration with Mind Health 360. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Dr. Robert Lustig. Dr. Lustig is Professor Emeritus of Pediatrics, Division of Endocrinology at the University of California at San Francisco. He specializes in the field of neuroendocrinology with an emphasis on the regulation of energy balance by the central nervous system, and his research and clinical practice has focused on childhood obesity and diabetes. Dr. Lustig's new book, Metabolical: The Truth About Processed Food and How It Poisons People and the Planet, is out now. Today, Dr. Lustig will be in conversation with writer, entrepreneur, and philanthropist Kirkland Newman Smulders. Kirkland is the co-founder and trustee of the Horizon Foundation and founder of the mental health not-for-profit Mind Health 360. She has worked for Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Prince's Trust, and was co-chair and trustee for Lessons with Love, a charity which supports refugee communities in Bethlehem. Today, Dr. Lustig and Kirkland will be speaking about the science of optimal diet, from keto to vegan, Mediterranean to paleo. Advice on nutrition and supplementation is confusing and conflicting at the best of times. So what should we actually be eating for our long-term health? Well, today, hopefully, we'll get a bit closer to finding out. So after 45 minutes or 50 minutes of conversation, Kirkland and Dr. Lustig will take questions from you, the audience. So please type any you have in the Q&A function, wherever it is on your screen, and we will get to them at the end. Well, that's more than enough from me. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Robert and Kirkland. Kirkland, over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. And it's wonderful to be in conversation with one of my heroes, Dr. Robert Lustig, who is one of the most knowledgeable, engaging, charismatic, smart people you'll ever hear talk. So we're in for a treat. And first of all, his book, his latest book, so he's written some wonderful books, Fat Chance, which was a New York Times bestseller. He's written The Hacking of the American Mind, which is all about, the addiction and the reward pathways that we face in our mental health. He's written the Fat Chance cookbook. Sugar has 56 names, and his YouTube video, Sugar, the Bitter Truth, has over 12 million views. And his latest book, which I think is absolute treasure trove of information, is called Metabolical: The Truth About Processed Food and How It Poisons People and the Planet. Now, it's a huge book, and it's absolutely packed with incredible information, and we're going to have a really hard time distilling some of this information in 45 minutes, but we'll do what we can so that, and I will shut up very quickly because Robert is just the most incredible speaker. In this book, Robert takes us through the crisis in modern health. Life expectancy, quality of life, and health span are going down. So for the first time in the last 4 years, in fact, life expectancy has actually decreased in the US, and not because of COVID. And we're also witnessing an epidemic of chronic non-communicable diseases. So it used to be that we would die of viruses and bacteria. Now we're dying of chronic diseases, such as diabetes, heart disease, stroke, fatty liver disease, cancer, dementia, as well as mental health issues, addiction, depression, anxiety, and autoimmune conditions, which are increasing in prevalence and severity. Now, what's really interesting is that modern medicine does not have satisfactory answers, because modern medicine essentially treats the symptoms and not the causes, while creating a host of side effects in the process. What's really interesting about these non-communicable diseases is that they're not druggable, as Professor Lustig tells us, they are foodable. So the only way that we can really address these and prevent them is by using food. Now, Robert, tell us, what compelled you to write this book, and what were it's a sort of cry of passion and protest. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Kiki, I hate to tell you, but you're one of my heroes, because one of the reasons I wrote this book was your story, okay? Because you suffered from inordinately difficult depression, intractable depression, and you used food to get out of it. In fact, medicines didn't work for you either. And that was an enormous inspiration for wanting to get this information out to the public. So everyone, please, recognize this is a collaborative arrangement here, and Kiki's Mind Health 360 can help everyone, not just not just her. So the short answer to the question is the problem of chronic disease has now overtaken modern medicine. Okay, as you said, it used to be we died of microbes. We now die of corporations. And the problem is those corporations are providing us with stuff that is actually metabolically dysfunctional. So we are being, in no uncertain terms, poisoned to death. All right? And the problem is we don't know what's where the poison is, what the poison is. People talk all the time now about this concept of food as medicine. Well, it can be medicine, but it can also be poison. And that, distinction, that dichotomy is really important. Newsweek just 6 months ago had on its cover, toxic food. Well, fact of the matter is some food is toxic. So what I want to do today is brief the audience with three terms that are always mangled and people do not know what they are. So here they are. First one, food science. So food science is what happens to food between the ground and the mouth. The second one is nutrition. Nutrition is what happens to food between the mouth and the cell. And finally, the third is metabolic health. And that's what happens inside the cell. As it turns out, all of these chronic diseases that Kiki mentioned before, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease, the diseases which now cost 75% of healthcare dollars, the diseases that are killing way more people than viruses ever did, COVID or otherwise ever did, right? These 8 diseases are all diseases of metabolic health. They are all diseases inside the cell. Well, it turns out the drugs that we use don't get there. The drugs we use don't fix the problem because all of these diseases are diseases of the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the little energy burning factories inside each of our cells. And what they do is they turn food into chemical energy. That chemical energy is called ATP. For all of you who took Bio 101 back in high school, you probably remember those 3 letters, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The energy is in the phosphate bonds. The mitochondria make ATP. And anything that poisons your mitochondria, anything that reduces your mitochondria's ability to make ATP is going to make you sick. It's going to, it is a poison. So the question is, food is supposed to increase your ATP. Well, guess what? There are certain items in our diet, certain edibles, certain consumables, and I don't want to call them food, but they actually poison your mitochondria so that you make less ATP. When you make less ATP, guess what? You get sick. So how to distinguish what is beneficial for your metabolic health versus what is detrimental? And that is the reason I wrote Metabolical, is to make those distinctions clear. Not just clear to the public, but clear to the food industry, because they're the ones poisoning us.
That's fun. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that you talk about in your book, which I found fascinating, was the 8 subcellular pathologies that underlie all chronic conditions. And you say all of them are nutrient sensing. And just to list those, and they're a little complex, there's glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, which you just referred to, insulin resistance, membrane integrity, inflammation, epigenetics, and autophagy. Now, we've heard a lot about inflammation being at the basis of most chronic disease. We are starting to hear more about mitochondrial dysfunction. In the past, we've heard about oxidative stress. Now, the interesting thing about these 8 subcellular pathologies is that, as we were saying, there is no drug to treat any of them. So when
That's
the 8 processes are working right, they promote longevity and health. However, when they're not working right, they promote chronic disease. So what is the best way? I mean, to summarize, one thing that you say in your book over and over again, which is absolutely brilliant, is the way you deal with this and the way to promote longevity and health is to feed the liver. No, protect the liver and feed the gut. And this is your mantra throughout the book. Now, can you talk us through, we know that processed food does the opposite of that. But can you talk us through how processed food impacts those 8 subcellular pathways and how we can actually, get those to work for us rather than against us?
Indeed. So the first thing people need to understand is that the 8 diseases that we talked about, the diseases of metabolic syndrome, are actually not diseases. They're the symptoms of disease. Type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cancer, etc. These are symptoms. And we say that we have medicines for these diseases, but we don't. Okay, like for instance, heart disease. Okay, well, throw a statin at it. So a statin will lower your LDL. The problem is the LDL is not the problem. This LDL is the symptom of the problem. In fact, if you take a look at the improvement in longevity due to primary prevention using a statin, the total number of days gained is 4.
Wow.
You will live 4 days longer taking a statin than not taking a statin. And of course, you will have spent about 20,000 pounds in about 20 years for 4 days. Now, maybe some people think that's a good trade. I don't think so. And in fact, statins have significant side effects. Rhabdomyolysis, where your muscles basically break down, diabetes, because they themselves are a mitochondrial toxin. So there's an example. Oral hypoglycemics for type 2 diabetes, right? They increase insulin release so that it will bring your blood sugar down. That's true. But every single study that looks at intensive therapy using oral hypoglycemics for diabetes show no improvement in mortality. If anything, you actually die sooner. Doesn't matter if it's the UK PDS study, the Accord study, the Advanced study, they all basically show no improvement. So you can get your blood glucose down, you can get your hemoglobin A1C down, and it doesn't make a damn bit of difference, right? Antihypertensives, you're treating the symptom, not the cause. Okay, each of these is downstream of the problem. And these 8 pathologies that you just mentioned, glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, etc., these are the true subcellular pathologies. So how does processed food influence these pathologies? Now, the first one is glycation. Glycation is why you paint barbecue sauce on your ribs before you put them on the grill to get that caramelization. Well, guess what? We're all caramelizing inside, all right, all the time. It is the reaction of life. It happens whether you like it or not. And it doesn't need an enzyme. It happens just, de novo. It's why you get wrinkles. It's why you get cataracts. It changes arterial capacity. It changes stiffness. It alters how well your brain works, because every time a glucose is added to a protein, it makes that protein less flexible. And every time a glucose is added to a protein, it releases a little hydrogen peroxide. That's called oxidative stress. Now, that hydrogen peroxide might be good if you're trying to clean a wound, but inside a cell, that's actually causing dysfunction. That's actually causing cells to die. So, and that's what, by the way, why our cells need antioxidants, is to quench those reactive oxygen species, that oxidative stress. And that's one of the reasons why, blueberries are good, for instance, is to increase your antioxidants. The point is that these processes go on whether you like it or not. The only way to stop these processes is to be dead. All right. So, but you can slow them. You can't stop them, but you can slow them. Well, the way to slow them is by not eating the stuff that makes it run faster. And that is glucose, i.e. refined carbohydrate, and fructose, the sweet molecule in sugar, which makes that reaction run 7 times faster than glucose. So we're talking dietary sugar. We're talking the sweet stuff. And people say, well, wait a second, hold on. What about fruit? Fruit's healthy, right? Fruit has those antioxidants. Yes, they do. Okay, but fruit has a little bit of sugar, not a lot. But when you turn it into juice, you're actually taking away the antidote. The antidote is fiber. Okay, now people think fiber is the stuff you throw in the garbage after you've juiced the fruit. Turns out the fiber is the reason to eat the fruit in the first place. And by the way, the antioxidants travel with the fiber fraction. So when you throw the fiber away, you're actually throwing a lot of the antioxidants away too. So why is fiber important? Fiber reduces the rate of absorption from the gut into the bloodstream of glucose and fructose and simple starches. And basically what that's doing is it's protecting the liver. It's keeping the liver from the tsunami of oxidative stress and glycation that's about to come when you, for instance, drink a 8-ounce glass of orange juice. But if you eat an orange instead, you are getting a much lower bolus of sugar, and you are getting the requisite fiber you need to actually block that early absorption, thus protecting the liver. And if you don't absorb it early, that means it goes further down the intestine where the microbiome is, where the bacteria are. So each of us has 10 trillion cells in our body, but 100 trillion bacteria in our intestine. Our bacteria outnumber us 10 to 1. Each of us is really just a big bag of bacteria with legs. Well, those bacteria have to eat something. Well, what do they eat? Well, they eat the fiber. So when you deprive your intestine of fiber, your intestine, those bacteria are now starving. Well, they ain't going to starve. They're going to survive. So what do? They eat you. They eat the mucin layer right off your intestinal epithelial cells, denuding them. And that ends up leading to irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, a phenomenon we call leaky gut, which allows lipopolysaccharides, which are inflammatory proteins, cytokines, which are inflammatory proteins, and whole bacteria for that matter, to basically get from the intestinal lumen, the inside of the intestine, through the intestinal barrier into the bloodstream, ending up in the liver and causing inflammation, and then for that reason causing insulin resistance and therefore metabolic dysfunction also. So it is essential to feed your gut. So you have to protect your liver from sugar, from other things too, like from glyphosate, the Roundup, from heavy metals like cadmium, which is in cheap cocoa, and from branched chain amino acids, which are in processed corn-fed beef, chicken, fish. And you have to feed your gut. You have to feed your gut fiber in order to, number one, set up that gel that prevents the early absorption, and also to feed the microbiome so that your microbiome will actually work for you instead of against you. All of these things mean real food. And that's the point of metabolical, is that all of these pathologies, all of these subcellular pathologies are foodable, not druggable. There's no medicine that can fix them, but food can, but it's got to be real food. Processed food is the opposite. Processed food is poison.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the key message really of your book. I mean, there's so many messages in this amazing, densely populated, amazing book, but is really that we have to eat real food, because real food is what contains the fiber, but we also have to eat, low sugar, and essentially processed food. They take away the fiber and they add the sugar and they add the salt and they add the bad fats. That's another thing that you talk about in your book, is the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s, because we know that it should be 1-to-1, but in fact, in processed foods, it's usually 20-to-1 omega-6s to omega-3s. Now, omega-6s are pro-inflammatory, whereas omega-3s are anti-inflammatory and therefore protective. So we know that we have to steer clear of processed foods. But it's a tall order, especially in our teenagers and in our kids. It's a tall order also because it's actually cheaper to eat processed foods than it is to eat real food. And so, I think the next part of this conversation should really be, okay, we know that we shouldn't eat processed foods, but how do we navigate the fact that there's advertising, that sugar is addictive, that our teenagers crave, processed foods, that it's cheaper to eat processed foods? How do we navigate that challenge?
So first of all, it's actually not cheaper. Okay, they say it's cheaper, but it's actually not cheaper. If you know how to shop, if you know how to navigate the grocery store, if you know how to be able to, squeeze and freeze at home, you can actually make a meal for less money than it would if you actually bought it at a fast food restaurant. Now, the problem is time. And that's something that costs money too. And people, have basically abdicated, their money for their time. And I recognize that. And the point is that there are ways to make processed food healthier. There are ways that the food industry could change what they are doing. They could re-engineer their products to make them healthier. They don't. One of the reasons they don't is because, number one, they don't want to do anything that's going to cost them money in terms of research and development. Number two, subsidies. Okay, subsidies are the big problem. What do we subsidize? We subsidize all the things that kill us. Corn, wheat, soy, sugar. That's what we subsidize. You see anybody subsidizing cotton? No. You see anybody subsidizing radish or broccoli? Bottom line is we subsidize all the stuff that makes processed food cheaper. Well, if we got rid of all food subsidies, and there's no economist on the planet who actually believes in food subsidies because they distort the market. And in fact, they have distorted the market. If we got rid of all food subsidies, then all of a sudden processed food would turn out not to be as cheap, and it would actually make people gravitate more toward real food. For just that reason, because anytime you subsidize one thing, that means you have to tax everything else in order to make book, because it's not like the subsidy appears from nowhere. Okay, so all you're doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul. Bottom line is, if we got rid of all subsidies, people say, well, then the price of food would go up. Actually, the Giannini Foundation at UC Berkeley did this exercise. They asked this question: what if we got rid of all food subsidies? What would happen to the price of food? And it turned out the price of food wouldn't change, except for two items: corn and sugar. And that's what we actually want to go up because of high fructose corn syrup and sucrose, causing this metabolic derangement. So in fact, I understand why people say processed food is cheaper, processed food is convenient, processed food is tastier. And we have to get to that whole question of taste in a minute. Okay, but the bottom line is, the only reason processed food is cheaper is because governments make it so. And that could be changed if people argued for the change in the food production and procurement practices that currently exist today. So one of the reasons for education that we're doing right now. Now, let's just talk about this tastier business for a minute. People say processed food is tastier. Why is processed food tastier? The answer is because it's loaded with sugar. And it turns out the molecule fructose is not glucose. Glucose is the energy of life. Glucose, every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it. Fructose, on the other hand, is completely vestigial. There is no biochemical reaction in any animal cell on the planet that requires fructose. It is a holdover from our plant ancestors. No one needs it, but we love it. And the reason we love it is because it is addictive. The molecule fructose acts on the reward center of the brain, just like cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, and shopping, gambling, social media, internet gaming, pornography. there's one reward system in your brain. Okay, it starts in an area called the ventral tegmental area in the base of the brain, which then transmits dopamine to another area called the nucleus accumbens, which is the reward center. And it just so happens there are numerous substrates that will make that reward center light up. And fructose is one of them. Now, we need reward. We need reward to get up out of bed in the morning. Right? We need reward to be able to hold down a job. So it's not like we should be doing away with reward. That's kind of silly. But the fact of the matter is that every single one of the things that I just mentioned, whether it be a chemical or a behavior, in the extreme leads to addiction. There's an aholic after every one of those. Chocoholic, alcoholic, sexaholic, shopaholic. The reason is because excessive chronic dopamine changes that reward center and makes it less active. And that's a phenomenon called tolerance. Then throw a little bit of stress on top, and you've turned tolerance into addiction. And so, every single one of these things in the extreme are addictive. And we have basically created an entire world population of sugar addicts.